A lot of the sound I tend to work with comes from the environment. So I like to visit a new city. So if I visit Toulouse or I visit Marseille, there are particular kinds of sounds that you hear in these places that don't exist in a country like Japan or Australia. So everywhere I go, I tend to have a bit of a listen to the way that the city sounds, the way that the environment sounds. And often those kinds of sounds tend to impact on how I compose my music. So for instance, I made a record a few years ago called Happiness Will Befall, and this record was recorded in India and Singapore and New Zealand and Australia over a 2-month period. And each of the compositions, I guess, reflected on the way that different cities move, different people engage with each other, different environments sound and feel and look. So for me, one of the things I'm really interested in is absorbing different kinds of cultures, different kinds of environments, and then synthesizing those into musical pieces in some way, shape or form. I have like a little thing called an Edirol R9. It's like a portable recorder. And I guess for me it's kind of like the Polaroid camera of recording devices, because you get an impression of the environment. It's maybe not a perfect photo, but it's an image, it's something, a memory, I guess, that you can come back to later. What's interesting, often with this sort of work, it reflects on the direct environment, the relationship between the performer and the spaces they come in contact with. So for instance, a few years ago in Japan, there was this group of musicians working with very minimal sounds called onkyo. It was to do with reductionism, because in Tokyo everything was so loud, everything was so busy, and the musicians stripped their playing right back to kind of give this sense of space and openness and ask the audience, I guess, to reflect on what the contrast is between outside and inside, personal and public, all those kinds of things. The idea of exchange is kind of crucial to this sort of music, because it's in some ways been based on that, the traditions moving back and forth between the United States and England and France and Germany, and even Australia has a history of experimental music and sort of sound art. And that kind of exchange has really sort of fueled new developments. And for me personally, I really enjoy the idea of working with other musicians, because there's a kind of relationship that you build up in listening and sort of creating work with someone else that you don't necessarily get when you're working on your own in the studio space. For me, there's two very sort of distinct ways of working. I do some works which are with vision, and I guess when I'm doing those works, it's very much about the interplay between what happens on the screen and the way that the sound affects you as well. I guess it's kind of like cinema. When you go to the cinema, different kind of musical patterns, different kind of sound effects, different sorts of foley make you feel a particular way. They make you feel like you're suddenly in the rainforests of Madagascar, or they make you feel like you're in a city somewhere when you're watching it on screen. So there's that idea of the correlation between vision and sound. So sometimes I'll make a concert like that, but other times it's literally about just taking away all the other elements, making it just sound, and then in some ways inviting the audience to use their imagination. So one thing I've always been really inspired by is this idea of musique concrète, the sort of French contribution to 20th century composition in a lot of ways, from groups like GRM. And through those people, they were able to really activate the imagination of the listener and ask people to invent new things in their minds as they listen to the compositions. And I think that's still something that's very powerful today. The concert will engage them in a different kind of way to if you go and see a band potentially, or if you're listening to music in your car, you listen in a particular way. And I think with concerts like tonight, it's very much about making people really close their eyes and focus on their ears, because it's something that not a lot of people necessarily do. I mean, in everyday life we tend to block out the sounds that we don't like. So if we're lying in bed in the morning and a car drives past, we tend to try and block that out. And I guess for me, the concert's an experience to let people open their ears up. record label called Room 40, and we distribute our music, which is similar to this, to 17 countries, including France. We have a distributor here in France, Metamkin. And I mean, we sell several thousand copies of many of the CDs, and we've printed something like 50 records. So I think there's a very strong culture of this work internationally. And what's great about it is I've been able to travel to China, to Singapore, to Japan, to New Zealand, to America, to next year I go to Africa. I mean, I can go to almost every continent in the world and present this work and have an audience for that work that's interested and excited about the idea of sound.